I'm Kate Robinson, and I'm a poet. I grew up right outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland, and I also spent most of my summers with my grandfather in the Adirondack Mountains. So I sort of feel that both of those places are home to me. I think I wrote my first poem when I was about 5 or 6. I couldn't write yet, but I had this bright, hideously neon pink journal that I would dictate things to for my dad to write down into. And I have my first poem that I dictated to him when I was probably about 4 or 5. I think that my grandfather was the one who first made me really interested in poetry. He would recite Ancient Mariner for hours on end. He would sit on the deck and recite Robert Frost poems. So I just grew up at his knee listening to poetry. And I started writing poetry, I think, partially because I wanted to share it with him. And when I was 10, he would send me an Emily Dickinson poem in the mail every week. And I started writing little riddles and poems in response to these poems and sending them back to him. Some of my greatest inspirations from the history of poetry are, well, certainly Emily Dickinson is one of the big ones. She was the first poet who I read and thought, I want to do that. I want to write poems. I think I've also been really influenced and inspired by really early poetry. Last summer I was reading The Mabinogion, which is a collection of Welsh myths, and I think that some of those really early poems, those really early myths, this is from about the 11th century, have a really alive connection to the land and to the seasons, and that's something that has really influenced a lot of my poetry, I think. If I were doing something other than poetry right now, I think I would be working with animal rescue and animal rehabilitation in some way or another. I spent a summer volunteering at a seal and otter sanctuary and tube feeding these 2-day-old seals, and it was amazing. And I learned so much from working with these animals. They teach you so much. And I had this one seal, Ronnie, that would follow me around and try to bite my hair off, and he was just so much fun. So I think I write a lot about the land. I write a lot about animals, and if I were not writing about it, I would be working with them. My first memory of digital technology is probably when my father got a fax machine, and it was absolutely mind-blowing that this could transmit an exact copy within seconds. And I remember I had a couple friends who also had fax machines, and we were sort of absolutely dumbfounded by the fact that if we forgot our worksheets at school, we could fax them back and forth to each other. And this was just miraculous, absolutely miraculous. Well, digital technology has certainly changed the way that I work in comparison to earlier poets with the advent of computers and word processing. And I write most of my poems by hand at first, and then when I'm unable to see the poem anymore, when the page has just become sort of a mass of scrawling and crossing out and little arrows and asterisks, that's when I transfer it to the computer and transfer it to word processing. And I think that one of the lovely things about working on a computer is that you can move things around. You can say, well, what if I started the poem with this stanza instead? And you can move it and see right away what it would be. And there's something really lovely about that. I think something also gets lost when one doesn't have to retype the poem every single time one wants to submit it or every single time one wants to edit it. Because when you go through that process of retyping something from scratch, you pretty much invariably find little things that aren't quite working right. So I think I try to take advantage of the best of both worlds, use the miracles of word processing, and also retype poems from scratch sometimes when I'm editing them. I think that this millennial generation, my peer group, definitely have characteristics that set us apart. I think that growing up sort of immersed in technology from at least the time of our teenage years has changed the way that we interact and the way that we think. I think it's made us more distracted in some ways. I think in other ways it's given us more of a sense of being able to connect and being able to combine forces, being able to organize protests, organize letter writing campaigns. I recently wanted to organize a letter writing campaign for something at my college, which I graduated from several years ago. Didn't have anyone's contact information, but through Facebook I was able to find all of this information and get 60 letters onto the desk of the president within a week. So I think that aspect of technology has certainly defined us and how we interact.